a mind-bending terror, 4 sisters, and a horrifying legacy so profound it left no physical trace. This knowledge changes you. Maine. A fire, but what it revealed defied sanity. Jars, brain tissue, journals of agony, faces twisted in terror. A private facility, a horrifying secret. This truth you were never meant to hear. It began in the depths of a brutal winter. A blaze consumed the Thornfield estate in Cumberland County, Maine. A grand structure reduced to ash and ember. But what firefighters discovered that night, in the mansion's deepest basement, would haunt them for the remainder of their lives, etching a scene of unspeakable horror into their very souls. Rows upon rows of glass containers, each meticulously labeled with dates, names, and strange, arcane symbols. And inside these jars, floating in an amber-colored solution that emitted a sickly sweet, cloying smell, floated what appeared to be human brain tissue. This alone was enough to curdle the blood. But it was not the most disturbing part. Scattered across rough wooden tables were hundreds of leather-bound journals. Their pages, a grim canvas, were filled with detailed, excruciating drawings of human faces. Faces twisted in agony, contorted by unspeakable torment, accompanied by terse, clinical notes penned in an elegant, unsettlingly precise feminine hand. The notes described a process, something called experimental psychological reconditioning, a chilling phrase that systematically documented the complete, utter mental breakdown of human beings. The local sheriff, Thomas Hartwell, a man hardened by years of frontier justice, would later recount finding another room. Its walls were plastered with photographs of the same faces, before and after shots, a horrifying visual testament to a monstrous transformation from normal, healthy individuals to hollow-eyed, vacant shells of humanity, each photograph numbered, cross-referenced with the preserved specimens, creating a chilling, meticulous inventory of ruined minds. For over 2 decades, the Thornfield sisters had operated what they deceptively called a private therapeutic facility for the mentally afflicted. Wealthy families across New England, desperate and discreet, had sent their troubled relatives to this remote estate, clutching at the hope that the 4 sisters truly possessed revolutionary methods of treatment. But what they had actually delivered their loved ones to was something far more sinister. A place where the boundaries between healing and horror had been utterly obliterated in the name of a perverted, unspeakable scientific progress. This truth they tried to suppress. It stated simply that the facility operated outside acceptable medical standards, but the reality was far more disturbing. The Thornfield sisters had been conducting psychological experiments that would have been unthinkable even in the darkest corners of European asylums. And the fire? It was no accident. It was a desperate act of rebellion set by the only survivor, and it almost erased the truth. The fire that consumed the Thornfield estate in 1867 was no accident. It was a desperate act of rebellion set by the only surviving patient, a woman named Sarah Peaton, who, against all odds, had somehow retained enough of her shattered sanity to comprehend the unspeakable horrors being inflicted upon her. Her act, a final defiant scream in the face of absolute control, almost succeeded in erasing the truth forever. But to truly grasp the abyss into which the Thornfield sisters plunged their victims, we must first understand the ground upon which their monstrous enterprise was built. Cumberland County, Maine in the 1840s was a landscape defined by paradox, a place where the rigid, unyielding tenets of old Puritan values collided head-on with the burgeoning, often unsettling new ideas about medicine and the elusive human mind. The region itself had blossomed, grown prosperous from its booming timber industry and its extensive shipping trade, giving rise to a new, powerful class of wealthy merchants and industrialists. These families, like their counterparts throughout New England, found themselves confronting a peculiar, deeply inconvenient problem. What precisely were they to do with family members who exhibited the first, unsettling signs of mental disturbance? In 1845, the concept of mental illness was not merely poorly understood, it was a shadow, a stain. Conditions we now recognize as treatable depression, debilitating anxiety, or even bipolar disorder were then often pathologized as profound moral failings, or far worse, as undeniable signs of an inherent corrupting weakness that could irrevocably taint an entire family's carefully constructed reputation. Wealthy families, desperate to preserve their social standing, frantically sought discreet solutions. They craved hidden places, silent sanctuaries where their troubled relatives could be spirited away from the public gaze, ostensibly to receive what they desperately hoped would be effective treatment. This environment, ripe with a fearful desperation and a profound ignorance, became the perfect, fertile ground for the Thornfield sisters. They arrived to exploit not just the vulnerable minds, but the very anxieties of a society grappling with its own unspoken fears. Section 3. It was into this volatile, desperate environment, ripe with unspoken fears and profound ignorance, that the four Thornfield sisters arrived in the autumn of 1844. They were not just women, they were a collective force, each a carefully honed instrument in a symphony of manipulation. Constance, the eldest at 32, possessed a striking intellect, sharp as a surgeon's blade, yet tempered by an unsettling, almost unnatural presence. Her brief studies at the Troy Female Seminary in New York had not merely educated her, they had ignited within her what she audaciously called revolutionary theories about the malleable, impressionable nature of human consciousness, a dangerous idea in the wrong hands. Her sister Margaret, 2 years Constance's junior, embodied a different, almost supernatural acuity. She possessed an uncanny, intuitive ability to read the intricate currents of people's emotional states, to discern their deepest vulnerabilities, their unspoken fears. She saw the cracks in the human psyche before they even began to show. The younger sisters, Eleanor and Beatrice, twins bound by more than just blood, had developed their own dark specializations. Eleanor, meticulously trained as an apothecary, wielded an extensive, esoteric knowledge of plant-based compounds, substances capable of subtly, insidiously altering mental states, bending perception, twisting reality. Beatrice, the youngest, had traveled to the very heart of madness, spending time in European hospitals, claiming to have studied under enigmatic physicians who dared to explore the physical foundations of madness itself. Together, they presented themselves as the vanguard of progressive healing. They spoke eloquently, persuasively, about a scientific, rational, and hopeful approach to understanding the mind through systematic observation and controlled intervention. They promised a cure, even for the most severe forms of mental disturbance, and desperate families, clinging to any glimmer of hope, wanted nothing more than to believe them. The stage was set for their insidious experiment. Armed with their persuasive rhetoric and a chillingly precise understanding of human desperation, the Thornfield sisters made their first decisive move. They purchased the old Hartwell mansion, an imposing 3-story structure that had languished, abandoned and silent, for nearly a decade after its previous owner had succumbed under mysterious, unspoken circumstances. This property, chosen with a calculated eye, was more than just a house. It was a fortress, a stage for their unspeakable experiments. It sat on 200 acres of heavily forested land, its isolation absolute, accessible only by a narrow, winding dirt road that cut deep through dense pine forests. The very solitude that had rendered the property undesirable to most buyers was precisely what the Thornfield sisters craved. It offered absolute privacy, absolute control. They spent months consumed by the renovation of the mansion, transforming it into what they deceptively described as specialized treatment facilities. Local workers, unwitting instruments of their dark design, were hired to construct additional rooms deep within the basement, rooms specifically designed not for healing, but for confinement. They installed heavy, reinforced doors, each fitted with small, sinister observation windows. A complex system of speaking tubes snaked through the walls, allowing the sisters to communicate with their patients without the inconvenience of direct contact, maintaining a chilling, disembodied authority. Constance, the eldest, supervised every modification with a meticulous, almost obsessive precision, her detailed plans guiding every structural alteration. She insisted on extensive soundproofing for the basement rooms, claiming it would create a therapeutic environment free from external disturbances, a plausible explanation masking the terrifying reality of enforced silence. She also demanded the installation of a sophisticated ventilation system, ostensibly for fresh air, but designed to allow for the introduction of carefully measured medicinal vapors into individual rooms. By the spring of 1845, the Thornfield Therapeutic Institute was ready to receive its first unsuspecting victims into its perfectly orchestrated abyss of control. By the crisp spring of 1845, the Thornfield Therapeutic Institute stood poised, a gleaming facade of scientific promise ready to receive its first unsuspecting patients. The sisters, meticulous in their dark craft, advertised their services not through public fanfare, but through discreet, carefully cultivated channels. Private letters, sealed with an air of confidentiality, found their way to prominent physicians. Whispers, subtly placed, permeated the hushed conversations at exclusive social gatherings. Carefully worded notices, cloaked in medical jargon, appeared in the hallowed pages of obscure medical journals. Their promise was simple, yet utterly irresistible to the desperate elite: complete confidentiality and revolutionary results. The response was immediate. Overwhelming. A torrent of inquiries surged from wealthy families across New England, each a testament to the unspoken torment of mental disturbance within their gilded cages. The sisters, however, were selective in their admissions, their choices guided by a chilling calculus. They chose only those patients whose families could afford the most substantial fees, a price that, unbeknownst to them, bought more than just treatment. And crucially, they selected individuals who could be sent away without raising too many inconvenient questions about their whereabouts, ensuring a swift, silent disappearance from public scrutiny. The ideal subject was one whose absence would barely register outside the family circle. The first to enter this meticulously constructed abyss was James Wentworth, the 24-year-old son of a prominent Boston merchant. James had returned from Harvard College exhibiting what his family vaguely described as episodes of extreme melancholy and inappropriate behavior, symptoms modern psychiatrists would chillingly recognize as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. He arrived at the Institute on a grey April morning in 1845, a troubled but fundamentally rational individual, accompanied by his hopeful father and a family physician. He entered believing he would find healing. He would instead find a horror he could never have conceived. The Thornfield sisters, a tableau of professional competence and deceptive compassion, greeted James Wentworth and his anxious family at the mansion's imposing front door. Constance, her voice a quiet current of authority, spoke with practiced ease about their revolutionary treatment methods, her words weaving a spell of reassurance. Margaret, with an unnerving, almost supernatural acuity, demonstrated an uncanny ability to quickly pinpoint the precise anxieties that plagued the young man, a silent reading of his innermost torments that astonished his father. The family was then led on a meticulously curated tour of the Institute's public areas, comfortable sitting rooms, a library appointed with a deceptive air of normalcy, and what appeared to be a standard medical examination room. Every detail was exquisitely crafted, designed to soothe worried families, to quell any nascent doubt that their loved ones would receive anything less than the finest care available. The sisters then delivered the crucial, final prerequisite. Their methods, they explained, demanded complete, unwavering isolation from all outside influences. Family visits, therefore, would not be permitted during the initial intensive treatment phase. James's father, convinced by the facade, paid the substantial fee, a sum equivalent to nearly $30,000 in today's money, a testament to his desperation and trust. He left his son in what he believed were capable, benevolent hands. It would be the last time he would ever see his son alive, though the horrifying truth of James's fate would remain concealed from him for more than 20 years. What actually transpired, however, began within hours of his family's departure. The sisters had developed what they chillingly termed systematic psychological deconstruction, a process designed not to heal, but to utterly obliterate a patient's existing personality structure. To systematically break it down, piece by agonizing piece, so that it could be rebuilt, re-engineered according to their specifications. James was initially housed in what appeared to be a comfortable bedroom on the second floor, a temporary illusion, before the true descent into the abyss began. The comfortable bedroom on the second floor, a seemingly benign space, was merely the first stage of a meticulously orchestrated process of systematic psychological deconstruction. Over the agonizing days that followed James's arrival, his environment began to subtly, yet relentlessly, warp. The Thornfield sisters, operating with a chilling precision, systematically altered every aspect of his surroundings in ways designed to induce profound confusion and gnawing anxiety. Furniture would inexplicably shift during the dead of night. Meals were served at utterly irregular intervals, shattering any sense of routine, and the very temperature in his room was constantly, unnervingly adjusted, swinging from stifling heat to bone-chilling cold. The sisters, in their perverse scientific pursuit, had discovered a fundamental, terrifying truth. Human beings, fragile in their perception, rely on environmental consistency to maintain their psychological stability. By introducing these seemingly random yet profoundly calculated changes to a patient's surroundings, they could begin to systematically undermine the person's very sense of reality, eroding their self-control, chipping away at the bedrock of their sanity. James, disoriented and increasingly desperate, began to question his own perceptions. Was he experiencing another debilitating episode of melancholy, a descent into his own madness? Or were these changes, these unsettling shifts in his reality, truly occurring? The torment was compounded by Eleanor's expertise with plant-based compounds. James's food, ostensibly for nourishment, was gradually, subtly laced with small amounts of substances. Compounds designed not to cause obvious physical symptoms, but to heighten his anxiety, deepen his confusion, to push him further into a waking nightmare. He began to experience what he meticulously documented in his journal, a journal the sisters cruelly encouraged him to keep as part of his therapeutic process, as terrifying waking dreams and strange visions. His reality, meticulously unraveled, was being rebuilt according to their horrifying specifications, one disorienting moment at a time. As James Wentworth's reality fractured piece by agonizing piece, the Thornfield sisters meticulously observed his descent. Their monitoring system was as insidious as their methods, a hidden network of observation panels, subtly integrated into the walls, and speaking tubes that allowed them to listen, to probe, to control without ever revealing their direct presence. They recorded his every tremor, every flicker of confusion, every desperate expression of fear, every fragmented attempt James made to make sense of his increasingly unstable environment was catalogued, dissected, analyzed. They were collecting data, not on a human being in dire need of help, but on a fascinating specimen whose agonizing responses to their calculated interventions could yield invaluable insights into the malleable, fragile nature of human consciousness. Their objective was clear: to push the boundaries of psychological endurance, to dissect the very fabric of the human mind. After 2 weeks of this relentless, systematic psychological manipulation, the comfortable facade of the second-floor bedroom was abandoned. James was moved down to the basement level of the institute. He was told, with the same chilling calm, that this grim descent was necessary for the intensive phase of his treatment. The basement room where he was now housed appeared on the surface medical in nature. Stark white walls, a single bed, cold, gleaming scientific equipment. But this room, too, was a carefully designed lie. It had been constructed for a purpose far removed from healing. It was a crucible, a laboratory of torment, where the boundaries of human perception would be utterly shattered. The basement room, ostensibly a medical chamber, was in truth a meticulously crafted engine of psychological destruction. The sisters had perfected what they chillingly termed controlled sensory environments, spaces where every single aspect of a patient's experience could be manipulated with an almost divine precision. James's world, once vibrant, was now reduced to a series of controlled variables. His room could be plunged into absolute suffocating darkness, erasing all visual anchors, or, with a flick of the sisters' unseen will, It could be flooded with blinding, disorienting light. Sound, the very fabric of audial reality, could be introduced with jarring suddenness, or eliminated entirely, leaving him in a terrifying, echoing void. Even the temperature, a primal comfort, was wielded as a weapon, adjusted to create either stifling, suffocating heat or bone-chilling, soul-searing cold. But the most insidious, most profoundly unsettling aspect of James's new environment was the constant, pervasive presence of the sisters themselves. Through the labyrinthine network of speaking tubes, they could communicate with him at any moment, day or night, their disembodied voices invading his space without warning, offering no escape. They began to engage him in what they termed psychological dialogues, conversations designed with one singular, terrifying purpose: to systematically undermine his every sense of self, to erode the very bedrock of his reality. Constance would spend agonizing hours questioning James about his most cherished memories, subtly suggesting that events he clearly recalled had, in fact, never actually occurred. Margaret, with her uncanny ability to read vulnerabilities, would engage him in discussions about his deepest fears and anxieties, gradually amplifying them, twisting them, until they swelled into overwhelming, paralyzing obsessions. Eliano, in turn, would clinically describe the physical changes she observed in his behavior, every tremor, every involuntary gesture, making him acutely, painfully self-conscious about his own body, his own expressions. His reality was being rewritten, his mind slowly, meticulously annihilated by the chilling symphony of their voices. With chilling precision, the sisters meticulously documented every aspect of James's agonizing response to their systematic torment. They chronicled his unraveling, his fractured sleep patterns, his raw emotional reactions, his desperate, futile attempts to resist their relentless interventions, and his slow, agonizing surrender to their absolute control. Their fascination fixated on what they clinically termed breaking points, those critical moments when a patient's psychological defenses, painstakingly constructed over a lifetime, would utterly, irrevocably collapse. These were the moments of triumph for the Thornfield sisters. James's breaking point arrived after 6 weeks of relentless, systematic psychological torture. The sisters, through their insidious probing, had unearthed a profound, festering guilt within him, rooted in an incident at Harvard involving the tragic death of a classmate. This, they realized, was the key. They began to hammer at it, relentlessly, subtly at first, then with escalating intensity, by constantly referencing this buried trauma, by subtly suggesting that James was responsible for far more than he had ever admitted. They gradually, mercilessly, drove him to a state of complete and utter mental collapse. The young man who had arrived at the Institute as a troubled, yet fundamentally rational individual, was transformed into something else entirely, a vacant shell. The sisters' notes from this period, a chilling testament to their horrific success, describe James as having achieved complete psychological malleability, a state in which his very sense of self had been so thoroughly destroyed, so utterly obliterated, that his mind could now be rebuilt, re-engineered, according to their monstrous specifications. The human soul, reduced to clay in their hands. This was not healing. This was psychological annihilation. The transformation of James Wentworth, the young man whose mind they had so meticulously obliterated and remade, was not an end. It was merely a beginning, a horrifying proof of concept. Over the agonizing months that followed, the Thornfield Institute received a steady, unending stream of new patients, each one a fresh subject for their expanding, unholy science. Each soul, carefully selected, meticulously chosen, not for their capacity to heal, but for their profound vulnerability. Their family's wealth was a prerequisite, yes, but their true currency was their psychological susceptibility. The sisters, now confident in their monstrous craft, had refined their intake process to a chilling, sophisticated art. They sought individuals who would respond most dramatically, most predictably, to their experimental torments. Their preference leaned towards those already suffering from conditions we would now recognize as anxiety disorders, depression, or profound trauma-related conditions. These souls, already teetering on the brink of psychological distress, were inherently more susceptible to the sisters' insidious manipulations, their minds already softened, receptive to the subtle invasion. They meticulously avoided patients whose conditions might render them unpredictable or dangerous, focusing instead on those whose suffering could be systematically amplified, redirected, and ultimately harvested for their perverse research. Each new patient followed a trajectory mirroring James Wentworth's agonizing descent. They arrived clinging to a fragile hope of recovery, only to be gradually, relentlessly subjected to increasingly intensive psychological manipulation. The Thornfield Institute was not a place of healing. It was a factory of shattered minds, a chilling testament to the ancient corruption that could fester when intellect and malice converged. With each successive patient, the Thornfield sisters honed their monstrous techniques, refining their methods into what they chillingly considered a precise science of mental destruction and reconstruction. The basement of the Institute, already a labyrinth of concealed horrors, was expanded further, burrowing deeper into the earth to accommodate the growing number of souls destined for their cruel experimentation. Each new room was not merely built, but meticulously designed for specific targeted types of psychological torment. This was not architecture, it was psychological engineering. Some chambers were equipped with mirrors, arranged in ways that would shatter perception, creating profoundly disorienting visual effects, twisting reality into a maddening fractured reflection. Other rooms housed insidious mechanical devices calibrated to produce specific, unsettling sounds or vibrations, a relentless auditory assault designed to fray the nerves and dismantle sanity. But the apex of their architectural cruelty, the ultimate expression of their control, lay in chambers where the very walls could be manipulated. These rooms were designed to gradually reduce the available space, shrinking imperceptibly at first, then with suffocating certainty, creating an escalating sense of claustrophobia that would intensify over agonizing stretches of time, pressing in on the minds of their captives, leaving no physical or mental escape. The Thornfield Institute was no longer just a facility. It was a living, breathing instrument of psychological annihilation, each expansion of its subterranean depths a testament to the sisters' expanding hunger for absolute control over the human mind. The abyss was growing, and it was hungry. With the physical environment meticulously crafted for torment, the sisters turned their formidable, individual expertise to the inner landscape of the mind. Margaret, the silent reader of souls, had refined what she chillingly called emotional amplification techniques. Her methods were insidious, identifying a patient's deepest, most primal fears and anxieties, then meticulously crafting experiences designed to make those very fears manifest in their fractured reality. She moved with an almost preternatural grace through the labyrinth of psychological distress, expert at discerning the subtle tremors, the minute cracks in a patient's sanity. She knew precisely when to introduce new, agonizing stresses, when to deliver the precise psychological blow that would push a patient closer to complete, irreversible breakdown. Eleanor's pharmaceutical experiments, meanwhile, evolved with a terrifying sophistication. Her mastery of plant-based compounds, once a tool for healing, was now perverted into an instrument of profound psychological alteration. She developed substances capable of producing specific targeted mental effects, compounds that would systematically enhance paranoia, twisting trust into suspicion, drugs that would amplify suggestibility, rendering the mind pliable, and volatile mixtures that could conjure vivid, waking hallucinations, blurring the lines between what was real and what was merely a tormenting figment. Her extensive knowledge of plant-based chemistry allowed her to create insidious drugs that would leave no obvious physical traces, yet would inflict profound, devastating mental effects, shattering the very bedrock of a patient's perception. Together, Margaret and Eleanor orchestrated a symphony of control, their individual talents converging to dismantle the human psyche with a precision that bordered on the divine, or perhaps the diabolical. Completing this unholy quartet was Beatrice, the youngest twin, whose specialization plunged directly into the body's raw sensations. She meticulously focused on what she termed physiological conditioning. the insidious use of physical discomfort to mercilessly reinforce the psychological manipulations orchestrated by her sisters. Beatrice devised techniques, precise and cruel, for wielding temperature, lighting, and sound, turning these fundamental elements of existence into instruments of torment. Her goal was to create specific physical sensations that would seamlessly intertwine with and amplify the psychological narratives being meticulously constructed in the fractured minds of their patients. Together, the Thornfield sisters functioned not as a medical practice but as a perfectly coordinated team of psychological executioners. Each sister contributed her specialized dark knowledge to the systematic, utterly relentless destruction of their patients' mental stability. Their chilling conviction was absolute. They viewed their work not as torture, but as groundbreaking scientific research. A revolutionary endeavor, they believed, that would fundamentally alter and forever reshape the understanding of human consciousness. By the winter of 1845, a mere year after their arrival, the Institute housed more than 30 patients, each soul trapped within their walls, existing in various agonizing stages of psychological reconstruction. The sisters, with chilling dedication, developed detailed protocols for their treatments, meticulously recording careful notes on which techniques proved most effective for different forms of mental disturbance. They began to discern terrifying patterns in their patients' responses, leading them to construct increasingly sophisticated and utterly perverse theories about the true, horrifying nature of human psychology. Their science was absolute, and its results devastating. The meticulously cultivated isolation of the Thornfield Institute proved to be its greatest asset, a formidable shield against external scrutiny. Within its silent, forested embrace, the sisters could conduct their unspeakable experiments without interference, their perverse research unfolding in undisturbed secrecy. The families, desperate and trusting, received regular letters, meticulously crafted narratives, penned by the sisters themselves, yet bearing the deceptive guise of their loved ones' handwriting. These letters, filled with assurances of progress and effusive gratitude for the excellent care received, were a crucial component of the sisters' psychological control system, designed to soothe anxieties and quell any nascent doubt. They meticulously provided plausible yet ultimately sinister explanations for why visits were still not advisable, maintaining the impenetrable veil of isolation. But even the most perfectly constructed facades eventually develop cracks. Local residents in Cumberland County, those living on the fringes of the Thornfield estate's silent domain, began to notice subtle anomalies that, over time, coalesced into a profound disquiet. Strange things began to filter into the rhythms of daily life. Deliveries of unusual supplies arrived with unsettling regularity. Large quantities of specialized medical equipment, strange chemicals, and what appeared to be esoteric scientific instruments, objects utterly incongruous with a remote therapeutic facility. The sisters, fiercely guarding their secrets, employed very few local workers, preferring to handle most of the Institute's operations themselves. This extreme insularity, once merely curious, now seemed a deliberate act of concealment. The subtle hum of suspicion, a dangerous whisper, began to creep through the community, threatening to pierce the carefully constructed silence of the Thornfield Institute. The subtle disquiet emanating from the Thornfield Institute soon escalated into outright alarm, whispered among the few souls brave enough to acknowledge it. Those local workers unfortunate enough to be employed at the estate despite the sisters' preference for managing operations themselves reported deeply unsettling experiences. Groundskeepers, toiling in the vast solitude of the forested land, spoke of hearing strange, unnatural sounds drifting from the very basement of the building, particularly during the profound silence of the night hours, sounds that defied explanation, sounds that hinted at suffering. Delivery workers arriving with their strange cargo found themselves confronted by a chilling protocol. The sisters insisted on receiving all packages personally, their faces impassive, their eyes unreadable. Outsiders were never, under any circumstances, permitted to enter the building unsupervised, a rigid rule that screamed of secrets to protect. But perhaps the most telling, most profoundly disturbing sign that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong at the Institute came from an unexpected and deeply unsettling source: reports from local physicians. Doctors who had been consulted by the Thornfield sisters about their peculiar needs for various medical supplies and equipment. Dr. Samuel Crawford, a respected practitioner from nearby Portland, would later provide chilling testimony. He recounted that Constance Thornfield had not merely inquired about general medical practices. She had asked highly specific, detailed questions about techniques for preserving human tissue samples. Her curiosity, he remembered, extended to the precise effects of various drugs on mental function, a line of questioning that went far beyond mere therapeutic interest. These were not the inquiries of healers. These were the meticulous questions of experimenters, of collector-pen. This chilling detail, whispered from a medical professional, painted a terrifying picture. The psychological reconditioning was not just about breaking minds. It was about harvesting them, about collecting the remnants of shattered consciousness. The careful facade of the Thornfield Institute, meticulously maintained by deception and isolation, was finally irrevocably shattered. The true, terrifying nature of the sisters' enterprise was not revealed by a righteous exposé, nor by an official inquiry, but by a desperate, silent act of survival. In the spring of 1846, a young woman named Mary Hutchinson escaped. How she managed to elude the sophisticated psychological traps, to navigate the labyrinthine mansion, to bypass the soundproofed walls and the ever-watchful eyes, remains a mystery shrouded in terror. But she did. She made her way, a ghost propelled by an unseen force, to the town of Falmouth, nearly 15 miles away, a distance that, for a soul so broken, must have seemed an impossible journey across an endless wasteland. Mary was found wandering the streets, a silent spectre in a state of complete disorientation. Her eyes, wide and vacant, stared out at a world she no longer recognized. She was unable to remember her own name, a fundamental anchor of identity, let alone explain how she had arrived in Falmouth. She was taken to the local physician, Dr. Edmund Foster, a man accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier medicine. But even Dr. Foster was profoundly, visibly shocked by her condition. Mary exhibited undeniable signs of severe psychological trauma, a mind utterly fractured, and appeared to be suffering from what we would now chillingly recognize as a dissociative disorder. Her very self had been fragmented, scattered by an unseen torment. But more disturbing than the profound psychological scars were the physical signs of her ordeal. Marks on her wrists and ankles suggested prolonged restraint, while an unnatural pallor and emaciation spoke of methodical neglect. These were not the symptoms of madness. They were the terrifying blueprints of torture etched onto a living canvas. The truth, long suppressed, had finally found a voice, and it screamed. Dr. Edmund Foster, the Falmouth physician, found himself staring into an abyss he could not comprehend. Mary Hutchinson's condition defied every medical text, every known principle of human psychology. Her profound psychological trauma, the terrifying dissociative state, coupled with the undeniable physical signs of her ordeal, the marks of restraint, the emaciation, screamed of a suffering so systematic, so utterly deliberate, it could not be natural. Dr. Foster, a man of science and empathy, knew he was witnessing the horrific aftermath of something monstrous. He immediately sought counsel, reaching out to colleagues in Boston and beyond, describing Mary's case with a growing sense of dread. The medical community, despite its initial skepticism, found itself unable to dismiss Mary's inexplicable state. The details, filtered through Dr. Foster's desperate accounts, began to circulate, sparking a quiet, horrified buzz. All roads, all whispers, inevitably led back to the remote, isolated Thornfield Institute, to the very facility from which Mary had seemingly escaped, a place shrouded in whispers of revolutionary yet secretive treatment methods. The meticulous secrecy, the strict isolation, the substantial fees, all the elements that had once reassured wealthy families now took on a sinister hue. The truth, no longer confined to the tortured mind of a single survivor, now began its inexorable creep into the consciousness of official authority. A formal investigation was unavoidable. The clock was ticking on the Thornfield sisters' dark empire, and the horrifying truth they had so carefully cultivated and concealed was about to be forcibly, irrevocably unsealed. The scientific community, once so eager for their revolutionary results, was about to confront a reality that would forever stain the pursuit of knowledge. The alarm raised by Dr. Foster and his colleagues could not be ignored. The state authorities, alerted to the unspeakable implications of Mary Hutchinson's condition, organized a grim expedition. Law enforcement officials, accompanied by medical specialists, descended upon the isolated Thornfield Institute. The mansion, once a bastion of elegant secrecy, yielded grudgingly. They forced their way through its imposing doors, the silence within broken only by their own uneasy footsteps, leading them inevitably to the labyrinthine depths of the basement. What they found there would forever haunt the annals of human depravity. Rows upon rows of glass containers, each meticulously labeled with dates, names, and arcane symbols, shimmered in the dim, horrified light. Inside, suspended in an amber-colored solution, floated what could only be human brain tissue, preserved in a sickly sweet, cloying odor. The very sight defied comprehension. Scattered across crude wooden tables lay hundreds of leather-bound journals. Their pages, a grim testament to systematic cruelty, were filled with detailed, excruciating drawings of human faces, faces twisted in pure, unadulterated agony. Beside them, terse clinical notes penned in the same elegant feminine hand described experimental psychological reconditioning, a process meticulously documenting the complete, agonizing mental breakdown of human beings. Then, the photographs, walls plastered with before and after shots, a horrifying visual chronology of normal, vibrant individuals transforming into hollow-eyed, vacant shells of humanity, each numbered cross-referenced with the preserved specimens. This was not a medical facility. It was a charnel house of the mind, a laboratory of souls. The sisters, however, were gone, vanished like the very minds they had shattered. Their meticulous records remained a terrifying legacy of the unholy science, but their own physical presence had dissolved into the shadows, leaving no trace, no body behind. The depths of their depravity now laid bare for the world to witness, even if the world would ultimately choose to bury it. The unspeakable horrors discovered within the Thornfield Institute were so profound, so utterly beyond the pale of human comprehension, that the authorities immediately moved to suppress the details. The official report, meticulously crafted for public consumption, stated simply that the facility had been operating outside acceptable medical standards. A bureaucratic whitewash designed to contain a truth too devastating for a fragile society to bear. The reality, known only to the few souls who descended into that abyss, was far more disturbing. The Thornfield sisters had been conducting psychological experiments that would have been unthinkable even in the darkest corners of Europe's most infamous asylums. The raw data, the preserved specimens, the journals of agony, all were sealed away, condemned to oblivion. The sisters themselves were never found, vanished into the vast, indifferent landscape of Maine, leaving no bodies, only a legacy of shattered minds and an enduring question. What ultimate knowledge did they gain from their heinous research? For over 2 decades, the secret lay buried, a festering wound beneath the surface of American history, until 1867. A fire, set not by accident, but by the desperate, defiant hand of Sarah Peaton, the only patient who, against all odds, escaped the final, complete obliteration of her mind. Her act, a final, horrifying scream of defiance, consumed the estate in flames. But it was in those ashes that the sealed records, the preserved tissues, the journals of torment were rediscovered by firefighters, a chilling echo of the truth brought back into the light, confirming the unspeakable. The 4 sisters that terrorized 1845 Maine and left no bodies behind is more than a historical account. It is a profound testament to the ancient corruption that can fester when ambition transcends morality, when the pursuit of knowledge deemed ascends into absolute depravity, and when institutions choose to bury the truth for the sake of societal comfort, this knowledge, now unsealed, will stay with you. It will change you forever.